texture isn't just for coffee signs. We're going to show you today how to do it on a holiday sign, which is amazing. And we're also going to show you how to create faux rust. You're going to mix sawdust, if you happen to have a woodworker, I'm married to one, into our paint. And if you don't happen to be lucky enough to know a woodworker, then you can actually buy wood shavings from the Spinet Company. And these were at Michael's, Hobby Lobby, that kind of place. So you can actually purchase sawdust if you need to. So let's get started with the mixing. All right, so what are we going to use to apply our paint is very important. We're going to use a duster stippler. Notice that this is a little bit floppier. Also, I was losing a hair. Than these dense stencil brushes. And then this is cut in a dome and this is flat. This makes a great stippling brush. You can use it for a ton of uses. You can even use it as a waxing brush if you are a furniture painter. So we know that we want to use number 18. It's a nice burgundy color red, but I want it to be a kind of a distressed, old, rusty sign. So what we can do is we can do one of three things. We could even do a little bit of all the things. We could go with number 37, which has got a kind of purpley hue to it. It's like just a very dark aubergine. Number 17, which is just a nice brown. And then number 28, which is black. So I could go with any one of these and I would create a different formula of red. So I'm a little bit torn. I'm gonna go with black. When we're mixing paints, we always want to put our dark into our light. Otherwise, you can run the risk of making a big pile. It grows and grows. One time I made a whole paper plate full of paint and never did get the right color. I had to start over. So always sneak in just a little bit. So I'm going to sneak in my black. Black is a very strong color too, so you do want to sneak up on it. And see where we get with black and red. You can do some distressing after. Okay, so I think that's looking like a much rustier color. And now we'll take our sawdust. You can adjust how much sawdust you want. So you could do lots to have it be super thick. You could do some thick in corners and some thin in the middle. You could do any kind of in between that you want to do. So I'll just start with this and see where I get. Nothing like just dumping it on there and going, right? Now this thickens the paint up so it's not going to spread as good. So a couple of things that you could do about that. Number one, you could base coat the project with this color before you do any of your texture, and then that will not let any of the holes show through, which I actually like that idea quite a bit, so I think I might do that. Okay, so I like that amount of texture. And then I'm going to mix another pile of base coat paint on our sheets of Mylar that we're using as our forever palettes. So you can wash them if you want to see the video on how to wash your stencils, including your forever palette, then you can click on that link. The wide palette knife is wonderful for mixing piles of paint. If I was in a little bit of paint, if I wanted to mix just a little bit of a color, I would switch into one of the little palette knives. They are fabulous for bouncing the colors together. Really amazing how needed a palette knife is. If you sandwich your knife in between two paper towels, cleans it up really easily. So these are the polyfoam brushes, and these are the ones that do a really good job of having good spring because they have support. They're made differently than the really cheap, like dollar type foam brushes. So polyfoam is the way to go. So then we'll just base coat. Nice long strokes. Use sparing paint because you don't want to make a big old gloopy gloppy mess on the edge of your painting. So use thin paint. It also will dry much faster. Use your control at your edges. And that will leave you with a lovely clean edge. Okay, so ready for the brush. We're just going to pick up our texture and spew it all over the place. So we'll apply it. Gonna need more red paint to thin this out. So that is good to know. Okay, let's go with our texture. And it's not that we want it to look like stippling texture, we just want the wood pulp to be on there to give us texture. And you can make it thicker on the edges if you'd like. The rust paint that we mixed is in a different video, and you can check that video out. It's in the coffee video, how to mix your own rust paint. Now you'll go back through and look for anything. This has got a little bit glumpy over here, so I'll feather it out with my brush to spread it out. All right, and now we wait for about 18 hours for this to dry. No, I think probably might take about 2 hours to dry. So just know that when you have thick paint like this and thick texture, it will take a while. So don't try to hurry this process. All right, we got our project dry. It did indeed take a long time, and the wood kind of kept some of the moisture inside of it for a while. It did bow quite a bit, but you can see that after it dries, it flattens out nicely. So now we've got a beautiful color. If I want to knock back the grit just a little, because that gets a couple of pointy points on them. If I want to knock that back, then what I'll do is I'll use some 60 grit sandpaper and just go right over the top of those, not trying to rub those off. That is some gnarly sounding sanding right there. Okay, we're gonna need the vacuum. Okay, that just gives me a little bit less sharp points. I'm gonna mix my color for my stencil. This is a rustic, rusted sign, so I'm gonna want a rusted white color. So just because white is white doesn't mean that your white can't be cream. I don't know if you've ever been to the paint store. They have like, 85 colors of white in their little paint chip books. And, they have like, white linen and cloud white and all of those things. So your white can be many colors. So I'm going to make my white be a browny looking cream color. So I'm mixing number 44 with number 27. Oh, nope, with number 79. And if you wonder what these numbers are, the numbers are for our paint reference label chart thing that will tell you exactly which paints in Decor and in Sherwin-Williams. We tend to use the Sherwin-Williams because we can put them from the little quart jars into the honey bottles, and the honey bottles make it easy to pour our paint. And we use so much paint on a daily basis that we need bigger amounts. 2-ounce bottles would never work for us. So we have to have the bigger. If you're somebody that paints for shows and stuff, the Sherwin-Williams is gonna be your best friend. But we've cross-referenced those colors, so that is why that we reference the numbers. Okay, got my stencil. It's just a Merry Christmas stencil, but it's in a good blocky lettering. I'm going to center this puppy. I could do a couple of different things. I could bring it down to the bottom and have some white space above. I could angle it. You can do a lot of different things, but in this case, I'm just gonna center it. And I'm using my eyeball calipers. I'm not super worried about just a hair here and there. I do want it straight. So if you don't have eyeball calipers, then you can get a T-square and you can lock that against there. And my eyeball calipers are broken. Okay, so there we go. I look for even on both sides and even across the top. I think that looks too far down for me. Someplace in between. Okay, I've got 2 pieces of tape. You always want to tape in 2 places. If I only tape there, then my whole stencil can wiggle, okay? Now I gotta recalibrate. And then if I tape in 2 places, it'll be tougher to tape over this texture. So just know that you have to kind of mush it into your surface. But then I can't move my stencil at all. Okay, so that is great. What we're gonna do now is we're gonna get ready to do our drop shadow. So the drop shadow takes an extra special step. However, if you've ever, I think one of the scariest things I've ever taught in workshops and painting lessons and stuff all over the country is when we get to drop shadow or lettering, people freak out because your handwriting is terrible, right? Everybody thinks their handwriting is terrible. So when you have lettering on a sign, if you lean or things aren't straight, it's gonna be terrible things. So letters can be really scary. That's what stenciling letters is so great. And the fact that they're reusable makes it super easy for us to add the drop shadow. So if I was doing this with vinyl, I would have to cut and weed 2 things to be able to do one project. And with this, I can do my drop shadow and then I can go to my base coat and then I can reuse it again and do it in a different color with a different style for somebody else. Okay, let's get started for that drop shadow. Step number 1 is you're gonna take your lettering base coat and you're just gonna give it a hint. I don't like to base it all the way. I just give it a hint top and bottom. And just rubbing across. I've rubbed off my paint over here. If you haven't used the dome brushes to paint, you are missing out. If you ever have a problem with bleeding under your stencils, it is because of your applicator and not offloading your paint. So those 2 things together will fix the bleeding under problem. Okay, so make sure that's dark enough or bright enough, I guess. Okay, now I'll take that away. And then I can see where my stencil needs to go back when I put it back on. Then what we'll do is we take our stencil and we drop it down evenly and slide it over evenly. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to plop him in water. I have a whole pile of dome brushes over here. If you don't have a whole pile of dome brushes, then go ahead and put your paintbrush in a baggie and set it off to the side. It's nice to have a bunch of brushes. Okay, now we're gonna offload, and then I'm just gonna stipple this color all over. Okay, I've got those letters done. I want to point out a couple things. You will lose brush hairs from these brushes, especially when you're working on a rough surface that will just kind of tease and drag the brushes out of your brush. So do know that if that happens, you just pick it away. It's hard to get the glue in these big, fat, tight brushes to saturate every hair. So when they're falling out, it doesn't mean your brush is bad. It just means that the glue didn't get all the way in. The second thing is did you notice that I didn't stipple all the way over to the right side of my lettering because I'm not going to have any drop shadow there. This is just the drop shadow color, so I just kind of did it on the side where I had the drop shadow. And then I didn't do a white or the cream color up here on my Mary, but I am going to go ahead and do the drop shadow because the Christmas word position will make it for the Mary as well, if that makes sense. So onward to Mary. When the holes get smaller, I tend to go ahead and swirl. Okay, now we'll take that up, give it a blow dry, and do the next color. Okay, to reposition our stencil, then you just go find where your stencil fit before Look for your edges. And you'll see me sliding it around, just making sure that I am indeed on my edge. I'm there. It's harder to reposition on the texture, but not impossible. Okay, so now we're going to load a dry brush. This is a dome stencil brush, and we're going to offload it 5 to 10 times. I think I say a different number every time I do a video, but it's someplace after 5. It depends on how scoopy you are and how dry you want the finished look. So then up here, I'm gonna do the reverse of what I did before, and I'm actually gonna stipple this time because I want coverage. This would not be a good fit for the jumbo daubers or the ink sweepers because of all that texture. It would be difficult to get in there. The brush bristles work really well. On these big openings, on these big letters, what I always do is if this is my Mylar left edge and my brush is stippling, I try not to stipple in that middle of the letter. I try to stipple on the Mylar on both sides. Okay, so what that looks like is this. So I'm gonna be on the Mylar over here, going around, and then I'll be on the Mylar on this side and meet in the middle. That keeps the stencil brushes, it prevents me from pushing too hard to get it all covered, and it keeps the stencil bristles from not being able to moosh out. Moosh is the industry term. Okay, I think it's time for a multi-masker. So I'm gonna lay this across this stencil and just anchor it right there. I don't want anybody moving around. And then I can reverse that. And then move that down if I need to. I think I'll just hold this part. As I come up there, I can feel it wants to give away. These are a little godsend. They were invented by us. And if you are a stenciler, you need a couple of them. And we've used, I think, as many as 3 at one time, but 4 seems like it would be a good number. I cannot believe we used up all that paint. Okay. This multi-masker is helping so much because of the raised bump in the texture, it's keeping the stencil raised in some areas and low in other areas. So it's allowing me to kind of push down on the stencil to keep the masking more stable. That's what your stencil basically is a mask. And this is where I need another one. Okay, and now we go back over everything a second time. I'm gonna need to mix some more paint. Okay, here we are. I think we could call this one stippling is my cardio. Okay, so I just wanna peek at these because then we have to apply the rust, and we're gonna apply the rust through the stencil. So I'm gonna take a little peeky poo, see what we think. Nice. Nice, 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 nice. That looks so good. Okay, now we need to rust. Like I said earlier, if you want to know how to mix the rust, you can look at some of our other videos. I'm going to put rust on the letters. I'm also going to put rust on the outside edges, so this will be like a 2-part process. Okay, so we'll get a small brush, and we just want to have some randomly placed bits of rust. Sometimes I find it super helpful if I don't have a visual, like you have the visual that I'm doing, to squint my eyes at my project. And then that helps me be random instead of like patterny. It's super easy to get into pattern mode. So the brown makes the base for the rust color, and the yellow is your highlight. These paints have lasted me for at least a year so far, but my previous set from the previous year did dry out. I may not have been as respectful of their drying nature. Okay, now this is going to be smaller than the brown. You're just going to touch it on that brown, but you want it to be within the brown. I'm going to put some on my palette so I can pick that up. Scantlier. You almost have to lay it down. You can't really kind of brush it on because it has a sandy texture. It actually has sand mixed in it. Plus my brown paint is not dry. However, it's doing what I want, so I'm okay. Gets to be gentle, 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 gentle. And I think I'm gonna switch applicators. I'm gonna go into one of these just really mezzaluna brushes. They're domed this way, super flat this way. That'll allow me to scoop some up and just set it down. And I can put it down and then I can go back like to this guy right here. He's a little bit too much. Just want a hint of that color. I can wipe out my brush. I can pick it back up and go spread that love someplace else. The other thing that I can do when this dries is I can knock it all back and sand it away if I don't like it. Like I'm not gonna like that one right there, but I will show you the tricks to get rid of that. Okay, are we ready for the reveal? Let's get our rust colors sealed up. I'll need them opened again in a minute, but we just wanna keep them fresh. Okay, presto, changeo, alamagocus. Here we go. Okay. Good rust. Now I got to get this dry so that way I can now go and manipulate the rest of the project. So stand by. Okay, we are about dry, but in the meantime, I'm going to use my dome brush and a fresh paper towel. I'm going to go into my black paint and I'm going to do some antiquing on the edges. This is a really cool technique. You can use this on smooth boards, but it works really, really good on these rough boards. So I'm going to stay out of my letters right now because they might still have just a little bit of residual dampness. And I'm going to go into my corners and I'll start in the very corner and then I'll walk out with reducing pressure and just round my edge and scumble into the texture. And that is going to start framing and giving my piece a hug. So that is why we put photos, pictures in frames, is to keep your eyeball inside the actual, the art itself. So every time you do a project, you either need to have your art stand off of it so strongly that it doesn't need a frame, or you find a way to frame it. That can be with a frame, or it can be with color, texture, pattern, those things. Isn't that fabulous? Did you see how that happened? Like, boom, it just kind of fades right on in there. Okay, so now I need to feel if these are dry, and they are. So I'm gonna use a little bit of sanding. I love sanding over this rough texture. This is the part where all the magic happens, right? So I want just enough sand through to make these look like old letters. So see what that already did? It knocked back some of my yellows. And because I have the raised texture, that's gonna sand away and reveal itself. Okay, and I might do extra at, like, say, the top and corners where maybe that would get extra wear because it is near the edge of the surface. Little bug. Anything that looks too pristine, we gotta rough it up. Oh man, that's so cool. You want to be able to still read the art though. What if you take it too far, and what if you get it so you can't read the art? You put your stencil right back on top, give it another base coat. It's not a problem at all. That's what we love about stencils. Now we need to see, I think we could probably use just maybe a little bit of muddy brown here and there. Just gonna go over the tops. I dirty brushed mixed into that paint, and I'm knocking that color down. And now we need to get some rust around. While I wait for those to dry, we've done some other projects. So we've got everyday coffee projects. So you can make signs for your kitchen. And this is done with that number 18 color, but we didn't tone it so you can see the difference between the two reds. But this is a fun project, and we have a video on YouTube for that. And stencils, whoa, and the surface. And then we also, this is where we started the rust on this saw blade sign. So you can make this for granddad and dad and all of that, but we rusted the tools, made a really cool rusty technique. And then here we did the diamond plate for the guys with the rust on the outer edge on the diamond plate. So super fun ways that you can use the rust technique. Okay, come back over here, wipe our brush out. Pick up the rust. Doesn't take a whole lot to get a little mark there. We just don't want it to be screaming rust. We want it to be like subtle rust. All right, guys, I love this project. This is gonna look so great with my Christmas decorations, and I hope you give it a try.